Making up one of the two bones in your forearm is the ulna. The other is the radius. The ulna is the longer of the two bones and is a part of the appendicular skeleton. The bone is often associated with our funny bone, but more on that later, seeing the joke is on us with that one. First, let's look at where exactly the ulnar bone is in our body. When looking at a skeleton in anatomical position, the ulna is medial to the radius and runs down the forearm parallel to the radius. To make it simpler, just think of the ulna on the side of your fifth finger or pinky finger. On the proximal end, the end closest to your elbow, the ulna articulates with the humerus and the head of the radius. On the distal end, the end closest to your hand, the ulna articulates with the distal end of the radius. The bone diminishes in size from the top extremity to the lower extremity with a long shaft between the two ends. Now take a look closer at the structure that make up the ulna. I will start at the proximal end. The proximal end has a far more interesting shape than the distal end and has a more complex interaction with the bones it articulates. The proximal end forms two joints, one with the humerus and one with the radius. The uppermost part of the proximal end is the acranion. It's a thick, curved, prominent projection. The acranion looks like the outline of the crest of a large wave about to break. This is the projection you can feel at your elbow, the hard pointy part when your arm is flexed. Below the acranion is a large notch, known as the trochlear notch. Distal to the trochlear notch, is the coronoid process. Together, these three structures look like a monkey's wrench. The concave shape they form allows for articulation with the convex shape of the trochlea of the humerus. The trochlea fits into the trochlear notch, and when the arm is flexed, the coronoid process fits into the coronoid fossa of the humerus. When the arm is extended, the acranion process fits into the acranion fossa of the humerus. This allows for a uniaxial movement so we can flex and extend our forearm. This is called a hinge joint, and I like to think of a door on hinges, opening and closing. Lateral to the coronoid process is the radial notch. And this is where the head of the radius articulates with the ulna, forming a pivot joint called the proximal radio-ulnar joint. This allows for pronation and supination of your forearm. In other words, we can turn our palm upwards or downwards because of this joint. Moving on to the less complex end of the ulna is the distal end. The bone becomes narrower at the distal end than the proximal end, ending in a small head. The head of the ulna articulates with the radius, forming the distal radio-ulnar joint, also a pivot joint. Medial to this is the radial styloid process. The ulna does not articulate with the wrist bones and has little or no involvement in wrist movement. There is actually a fibrocartilaginous disc at the distal end of the ulna, and this articulates with the wrist bones, not the ulna. Between the proximal and the distal end is called the shaft, and makes up most of the length of the bone. The most important part of the shaft is the interosseous crest. This allows for attachment of the interosseous membrane to the shaft of the ulna. This forms the radio-ulnar syndesmosis joint, a fibrous joint between the ulna and the radius. As you can see, the ulnar bone is an interesting bone. that makes up a part of the elbow joint, as well as two other joints with the radius. This allows us the freedom to move our forearms, to bend, and to rotate them. This brings us back to the funny bone. When we're moving our forearms around, we often hit our elbow, or our cranium, as we now know it is called, on a hard surface. A sharp pain and a feeling of pins and needles follows. We may say we hit our funny bone, but in fact, and this is when we learn the joke is on us, it is not a bone at all that sends the pins and needles down our arm. It is the ulnar nerve. The ulnar nerve is the largest unprotected nerve in the body, so it is easy to injure, and as most of us have experienced, sends a funny feeling down our arm when it is knocked. The origin of the name funny bone is believed to be because of the association with the humerus, and so humor and funny seem to play off each other. I'm not sure about you, but I don't find it very funny when I hit my ulnar nerve.